Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back for part 4 of my first impressions videos on Resident Evil Revelations 2. And this is the fourth and final episode that we're going to discuss in this one. There's not a whole lot to say about Claire's campaign in this because it's over relatively quickly. There's no. If you're expecting like a big end boss fight in Claire's campaign, it's not there. Essentially, you do a little bit of exploring and needling around. There's a cutscene, and then you have to escape the facility before it detonates. And there is maybe 4 enemies on normal that you have to. You can either run past or you can kill them. I stopped to kill one time, and I ended up not having enough time to finish the segment and failed and had to retry. So you can run past all of them. Plus, they're the invisible enemies from Barry's campaign that I mentioned a couple videos back. So yeah, it's quite easy to bypass the enemies in this in Claire and Moira's section of the campaign, and then it basically ends, and you go to Barry's. There's nothing of real significance as far as wrapping up the story in Claire's campaign. Essentially, what it does in this episode is it basically sets up everything for Barry's and establishes how he got there, why he's there, and everything like that. There's no real. I didn't feel like there was a resolution to the story in Claire's campaign. It just kind of abruptly ended and then segued into Barry's campaign, and then 6 months later. So, with that being said, let's discuss Barry's campaign. Before we get into a major discussion about this part of the episode, spoiler warning, stop now if you don't want to know what happens. I'm not going to like waste the ending or anything, but some of the things I mentioned are really big spoilers if you haven't played the other episodes. So, with that being said, let's get started. Barry's campaign immediately picks up after the end of episode 3 gameplay wise, after him and Moira have been separated by Alex Wesker. Um, with the conclusion of the events in Claire's campaign, you are left with some lingering questions about Wesker, uh, considering that in the middle of Claire's campaign, she blows her brains out. So now we're trying to figure out why is she here now. So one thing I will say about this episode, it definitely wrapped everything up quite nicely. I wasn't really left with any lingering questions as far as what we're exposed to during the course of the main gameplay. Now, the Wesker angle I was really intrigued by it at first because Alex Wesker was kind of like this. It started to be built up around Resident Evil 6, maybe? I can't remember. But there was the possibility of another Wesker being out there, and that was intriguing because of how screwed up and evil Albert turned out to be. Well, as it turns out, Alex is just as screwed up as Albert ever was, and she makes references to events that in the previous games involving Albert, even so far as getting her hands on Ouroboros and experimenting with that. So it was kind of neat having that throwback to 5 with Ouroboros. I thought that was a kind of a neat virus concept, but they just never really uh, went anywhere with it after 5. Um, but as it was explained in 5, it was basically the most lethal virus in the series to that point. Now, there's a lot of things kind of going on here with the concept of immortality that Alex was. researching for Spencer. And the conclusion that she came to is kind of, I'm glad they went with, as opposed to not. She basically acknowledges that no matter what you do, the body will age. So she essentially finds a way to transfer her consciousness into another body. Whether or not she's successful in that aspect is up to you when you view certain things. Um, there's an epilogue that strongly hints at that, but the way events play out throughout the course of the episode, it's kind of hard to really come to a. It's going to leave people debating, I think, because they already debate a lot of story aspects of the series already. But I think probably my biggest letdown as far as the story goes is I kind of was hoping they were gonna, if they were gonna introduce Wesker, that they would have saved her for maybe like Resident Evil 7 or something like that. But I mean, it worked because she was an interesting antagonist. Um, and I have a whole big opinion on that, but that's not for this. That's for a more generalized video because I would end up covering several aspects from the series. So moving on to what we're talking about, and that being Resident Evil Revelations 2, uh, I kind of felt the ending of Barry's campaign could have been more condensed a little bit, especially since Claire's was so brief. But because Barry's felt kind of stretched out to me. Now, I'm not saying it was bad per se, but you go through this open area to get to the mines. You have to do some minor puzzle solving to get into the mines. Then once you're in the mines are filled with gas. If you're in the gas for too long, you will die. And you can climb up on stuff to get out of the gas, and the color fades back into your screen, and then you can go back down, walk through the gas, and do whatever you're going to do. And again, there's some minor puzzle solving to get through the gas and to get to an elevator to descend deeper into the complex. And then once you do that, you come across what is essentially a replica. Well, not really a replica, but like a throwback to the Spencer estate from the first Resident Evil, and even the Ashford residence in Code Veronica, which I thought was cool, but then I was quickly reminded of one of the things that used to irritate the crap out of me about the old Resident Evil games, and that was backtracking. Lots of backtracking. You have to find the security card to unlock the security door, and then when you unlock the security door, you gotta go. You can find the emblem key to go unlock the emblem door. Once you unlock the emblem door, then you can go find the other security card you need to unlock the third security door that you could have went through. And it was just didn't. It wasn't terrible because they at least peppered it some with documents that you could find to read and made the story more interesting. But I hate backtracking. And one of the biggest complaints that's leveled at this game, and I even kind of said it myself a couple times, is it very much feels like they're recycling the environments. You go through an area as Claire. You go basically the opposite way through the area as Barry, and then in the next episode you go through an area as Claire. Then you start maybe in a sort of separate area than Claire did when you play as Barry, but you end up in the same area. So the backtracking just kind of felt like, to me, in this particular game, it felt like an artificial extension of gameplay to make the game longer. And from kind of already having fatigue from seeing the same environments over and over and over again, that just kind of hammered that feeling in a little bit more, having that backtracking there. And I know what they were doing. It was kind of like a throwback to the old Resident Evil games. But for a $40 title, by this point, their gameplay, I think, was already substantial enough between the campaign, the raid mode, the unlockables, and the things that you could do that they didn't really need to make it feel like, I don't know, it just felt forced to me. And that's the biggest criticism I can level at Barry's campaign in this particular episode. But again, I'm not saying it's bad per se. Your mileage may vary. You might not particularly mind it, but I just kind of was annoyed by it a little bit by that point because at this point in the game, it probably wouldn't have bugged me so much if it would have happened earlier on. But now that I kind of you have this setup as to what's going on, I want answers and to continually have that stretched out and like I'm almost there. Oh no, wait, I still got another half hour of gameplay because I got to go backtrack and find the fucking key. And then I got to go get this goddamn security door card and blah 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 blah. And uh, to top it all off, then they do a time sequence where you're waiting for an elevator and you're being bombarded with enemies. And so it just felt very much like a lot of just, like I said, artificial extension of gameplay. Although all that can be forgiven because I loved the final boss fight. Uh, Again, spoiler alert. Claire shows up, and as Claire, you're on the helicopter sniping at the final boss from the helicopter when you're out in the open while the boss is chasing Barry. Once Barry and Alex end up in, I'm just going to say it's Alex, I'm not even going to beat around the bush. Once Barry and Alex end up into like a cave, there's like a little cave section because you're still kind of like around the mines. Once you end up in the mines, then it automatically switches to Barry, and you can take pot shots at her, and you got to try to get back out into the open, and then it immediately switches back to Claire. So I thought that was kind of a cool dynamic back and forth. It added a little bit to it, but it wasn't. It didn't. It was probably one of the better Resident Evil final boss fights in a while. Uh, I wasn't a big fan of the Wesker fight in five. Simmons was just talk about beating a dead horse. I mean, you fought Simmons what on the train, then you fought T-Rex Simmons, Brundlefly Simmons. Oh, then there was a section on the bridge between the quad towers when he was like the I don't know what the hell he was, a four-legged thing with in which Ada was involved. And then when you're in Ada's campaign, you fight him a couple times. So it was just ugh. Um, it kind of got a little fatigued with fighting Simmons in Resident Evil 5 or Resident Evil 6, if you couldn't tell. So this boss fight I thought was a nice change of pace. It like I said, it was just cool having that back and forth between Claire and Barry, and it wasn't like that fake co-op feel where she's like right next to you and then you could just switch at your leisure. They each had different roles in the battle, and it just worked really well. I thought, um, and I thought that was kind of a neat way to finish it up, and it was a nice payoff to the whole situation. The dialogue really veered in the cheesy territory towards the end there when Barry and Moira are reunited. Especially with Barry, I kind of felt like some of his dialogue was out of character, especially since because he was kind of like a big goof in Resident Evil, and then in this one he's like, not that I obviously have any problem with cussing or anything like that, but I just kind of felt like having Barry dropping f bombs towards the end, like every 5 seconds, was a little forced, um, and kind of like just a little uncharacteristic of him. But it still wrapped things up nicely, and I would say overall the story in Revelations 2 was far better than the story in Resident Evil 6. Not that that's necessarily saying a lot, because the story in Resident Evil 6 was blah, all over the place. And I actually didn't really mind the story in Resident Evil 6 like some people did. I have some issues with it, and I can recognize that it's not like the greatest story in the series, but I didn't have the full tilt hatred that some people had for it. There was just some problems I had here and there with how it was handled. But moving forward, we'll see where they go with the series. I mean, I'm sure by now we all know Resident Evil 7 is most likely in development, and we'll probably hear something. I'm assuming they'll finally say something at E3, because they strongly hinted last year that they were going to talk about it, and then they were just like, no, we're not. No, we got nothing. So, we'll see how that plays out, and if any of the story beats in this game have any impact on Resident Evil 7. Of course, the one that I'm most interested in can't really have any impact for another 10 to 15 years in universe, so it really won't surround the characters we know and have come to grow fond of now, because most of them are getting up there. They'll be Barry's current age by the time that story may or may not pay off, so we'll have to wait and see how that develops. But all in all, it was refreshing to have a protagonist that, as much as I like Jill Valentine and Chris and Leon, it was refreshing to have Claire back. Um, Barry, I wasn't as like, oh my God, they got to bring Barry back like some people were. Because, I mean, really, he was like a minor support character for Jill's campaign in the first game. Meant he was in the epilogue, like one, wasn't it like one possible epilogue he was in for Resident Evil 3, and then he just kind of showed up in Mercenaries here and there. But it was neat, I mean, it was a nice change to have Barry involved, as opposed to maybe, they could have very easily had Chris come into the rescue or something like that, but expanding upon the universe and kind of throwing in some of these characters. And I can't help but wonder, and I've said this in the past, that, as these characters are getting older, like Jill's in her late 30s, I think Chris is like 40, he might be like 40, 41, somewhere around there. Leon's in his late 30s. Actually, Jill might be 40 too. I can't remember. Or 40 also. Um, Claire's in her late 30s. Ada's in her late 30s. So, I mean, these characters are getting older as the timeline goes on. So I can't help but wonder if maybe, they're testing the waters with some younger characters to maybe expand upon them in the future, because it's either that or, reboot from scratch. And knowing Capcom and reboots, and actually just reboots in general, Claire would probably end up like as Chris's drugged out, strung out or ex drug addict sister, and Jill would probably be like, I don't know, I don't even want to think about it. But I don't think I would be totally opposed to future games in the series, like Resident Evil, like let's say 8 or 9, having Helena or Sheva and Moira taking up the mantle for these characters and taking on a threat that could be possibly being established in this particular game. But again, that's a conversation for a different video. But all in all, now that all 4 episodes are out, if you've been kind of on the fence, um, my suggestion is, if you're a Resident Evil fan, pick up the physical disc for the consoles, or get the. I think you can get the season pass or whatever it is off of Steam, and it comes with all 4 episodes. There is 2 bonus episodes. I haven't played those yet. I'm going to give them a shot. It's supposed to flesh out Moira's story in the 6 months on the island between Claire's campaign and Barry's campaign, and there's one for Natalia that's supposed to kind of flesh her character out. So I will get around to playing those and seeing what happens in those, and I'll talk about those. But really, if you're a Resident Evil fan but didn't like the particular business model of the episodic content, which I'm still not sold on, now that you can get the bundle of all 4 episodes, um, it's worth it to play it if you're a fan of the franchise, especially if you liked the first Revelations. If you liked, I don't, it's hard to compare the game to Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. Even though they kind of play like that, they're not quite as action oriented as those 3 games were. I'd say it's more like 2 and 3. It's got a little bit more action than those 2 games, but it's still got more of a survival horror feel than 4, 5, and 6 did. But if you're not a Resident Evil fan, there's probably nothing you're really gonna find in this game to enjoy. There's nothing I can say that will change your mind, and there's nothing in this game that will change your mind on the series. But all in all, I enjoyed it. It's one of the more solid Resident Evil releases I've played recently. Um, and again, if they can find a nice balance between what they have in this game, what they did in the older games, and what they're currently doing in the newer games. Well, actually, truthfully, this is a pretty decent balance between those first 3 titles and the last 3 titles. Um, so if they can build upon the foundation that they've made with the numbered entries and then these 2 Revelations games, I think they might find that common ground for people that they've been so desperately trying to find, and then they can please both demographics that are fans of the franchises. But all in all, like I said, give it a shot if you're a fan of the series, especially if you find it on sale, which I would imagine in a month or two it'll probably go on sale or drop in price a little bit. And then experience the game for yourself and see what you think. If you're a console person, if you have both consoles, from what I've gathered from reading, the Xbox One version performs better than the PlayStation 4 version as far as frame rate. But if stuff like that doesn't matter to you, then you really can't go wrong with either release. And if you only have one console, then there's your choices are pretty limited, I guess. But it's out for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. And I thought it was a very solid game. And my opinion on the way they released it aside, it's definitely worth checking out. But again, guys, like always, I want to thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.